Welcome to the Religious Studies Podcast, where we kind of unpack some pretty fascinating and sometimes unsettling aspects of belief and practice, you know. So before we dive in, a quick note, this podcast is AI generated, but all the facts are verified by Bastian Freiburg. So today's deep dive takes us into the murky world of human trafficking,
Okay.
specifically within Nigerian trafficking networks.
Interesting.
What's particularly disturbing is how religion, often associated with morality and compassion,
Right.
is used as a tool for exploitation.
It is a jarring juxtaposition, isn't it? This idea that something meant to offer solace and guidance can be twisted into a weapon of coercion.
Absolutely. You've probably heard about juju before.
All right.
But it's much more than just voodoo-like rituals, as it's often portrayed in the media. It's a complex system of spiritual beliefs deeply embedded in some West African cultures. What we're seeing is how traffickers exploit these beliefs, turning something sacred into a tool of fear.
To understand this fully, we need to consider the context. Picture a young Nigerian yearning for a better life, lured by promises of opportunity in Europe.
Right.
They enter into an agreement with a trafficker, and this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
These agreements often involve religious oaths and threats, adding a layer of spiritual pressure to the situation.
So it's not just a contract, it's binding on a spiritual level that must make it incredibly difficult for authorities to intervene.
Precisely, proving religious coercion in a court of law is challenging, to say the least. On top of that, there's the very real fear of spiritual repercussions instilled by the traffickers.
Okay, let's unpack this fear a bit. It stems from a strong belief in the occult within certain African communities, right?
Exactly. This isn't about superstition. It's about a worldview where spiritual forces are seen as active and influential in everyday life. Traffickers prey on this, using it to cement their control.
It's almost like they're tapping into a pre-existing system of power and manipulating it for their own gain.
Precisely, and what's particularly insidious is how they distort traditional narratives and figures to achieve this. Take, for instance, Andrew Demon's research on the use of what he calls Mary sagas.
Mary sagas. Tell me more about those.
Demon uncovered a particularly disturbing tactic where traffickers exploit the reverence surrounding the Virgin Mary.
Right.
In many cultures, Mary is seen as a symbol of purity and compassion. But traffickers twist these stories, turning Mary into a vengeful figure who punishes disobedience.
That's unsettling, to have a figure of comfort transformed into a source of fear. It must be incredibly effective in silencing victims.
It is, and it's not just limited to manipulating figures like Mary.
Okay.
Traffickers also leverage traditional rituals to bind victims to their promises.
Okay.
The Ida religion, for instance, has a strong emphasis on oath-taking ceremonies involving deities.
Can you tell me more about the Ida religion and how it plays into this?
It's a fascinating religion with a patriarchal structure and deep-rooted traditions around oath-taking. These oaths aren't just empty words. They carry immense weight within the Edo worldview. To break an oath sworn before a deity is to invite spiritual ruin, not just for yourself, but potentially for your entire family.
Wow, that puts a whole new level of pressure on these victims.
Yeah.
It's not just about their own well-being, it's about the well-being of their loved ones as well.
Exactly. And traffickers exploit this sense of responsibility ruthlessly. Imagine a young woman forced to take an oath before a powerful deity vowing obedience to her traffickers. The psychological weight of that must be crushing.
It's heartbreaking to think about they're trapped not just physically, but also by this invisible web of spiritual obligation.
And what's even more disturbing is that this control extends beyond Nigerian borders. Traffickers utilize a concept known as remote control to maintain their grip on victims even after they've been moved to Europe.
Remote control, what does that entail?
It involves using specific rituals and objects believed to have supernatural powers. Think of things like peppers and powders imbued with supposed magical properties that are used to threaten and intimidate victims.
So even thousands of miles away, these women are living under constant fear and threat. That's horrifying.
One social worker described it as a suffocating psychological pressure, a feeling of being watched and controlled by unseen forces. It's a constant reminder that disobedience will have dire consequences both in this life and the next. A chilling example of this is the way traffickers manipulate beliefs surrounding the goddess Ayela.
Ayela, who is she and how do they use her?
Ayela is a fascinating figure in Nigeria. She's revered as a protector deity, a symbol of justice and righteousness. Yet traffickers twist her image, portraying her as a vengeful force who will ruthlessly punish any disobedience.
It's a complete perversion of her true nature, exploiting the very faith that should offer comfort and protection.
Exactly. They take a figure who embodies strength and justice and transform her into a weapon of fear and control. It's a particularly potent tactic given the deep reverence for Ayala within certain communities.
It really highlights the insidiousness of this whole operation.
Yeah.
They're not just exploiting people. They're exploiting their faith, their deepest beliefs.
And this exploitation becomes even more complex when these victims arrive in Europe.
Right.
They're suddenly confronted with Western secularism, a worldview that often dismisses or downplays the power of traditional beliefs.
So not only are they dealing with the trauma of being trafficked, but they're also navigating this clash of worldviews.
Yes, and this clash creates significant challenges for social workers and authorities who may struggle to understand or acknowledge the depth of these beliefs. It's a sensitive issue, but a critical one to understand if we're going to effectively combat this form of trafficking. It's a real dilemma. On one hand, you have these deeply held beliefs that are being exploited,
Right.
and on the other, you have a system that might not fully grasp the gravity of those beliefs. It's almost like these victims are caught between two worlds.
That makes me wonder if there are any approaches that bridge this gap, something that addresses both the physical and spiritual needs of these victims.
That's a great question, and there have been some interesting developments in recent years. We're seeing a growing trend of integrating Christianity, specifically Pentecostalism, into rehabilitation efforts for trafficked Nigerians.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It seems counterintuitive given that we've been discussing how religion itself is used as a tool of control.
Oh,
How does that even work?
think of it as reclaiming the power of faith.
Okay.
Instead of being consumed by fear of deities invoked to threaten them, these women are finding solace and strength in the figure of Jesus Christ.
So it's not just about replacing one belief system with another.
Not exactly. It's more about providing a counter-narrative, a source of hope and empowerment that directly challenges the negative spiritual forces they've been subjected to.
Okay.
There are reports of social workers incorporating prayer, religious counseling, and even elements of exorcism into therapy sessions.
Exorcism, that sounds intense. Are there any ethical concerns surrounding that?
It's definitely a sensitive approach, and it's not for everyone, but remember, we're dealing with deep-seated trauma and fear here. For some victims, the idea of being spiritually afflicted, perhaps even possessed, is very real.
Mm-hmm.
In this context, exorcism is seen as a way to break free from that spiritual hold, to cleanse and reclaim their sense of self.
I can see how that might be empowering for some, but it does raise questions about potentially reinforcing those beliefs. Are there any documented cases where this approach has been successful?
There are actually quite a few. One that comes to mind is a woman who was trafficked to Italy and was deeply traumatized, convinced that Ayala was going to punish her for even considering escaping her traffickers.
Right.
Through working with a Pentecostal pastor, she was able to confront her fears, renounce the oaths she had taken, and eventually find peace and a sense of agency through her newfound faith.
That's a powerful story. It sounds like she went through profound transformation.
Mm-hmm.
But I do wonder if this approach could have unintended consequences. Could it inadvertently reinforce the victim's belief in the power of these curses?
It's a valid concern. It's crucial that any integration of religious practices into therapy be done with sensitivity and a deep understanding of the individual's beliefs and needs.
It sounds like a delicate balance, respecting their beliefs while also empowering them to move beyond fear and control. But focusing specifically on the use of Pentecostalism, are we simply replacing one form of control with another?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It all comes down to how it's implemented. The
Yeah.
key is to ensure that these women are choosing this path freely and that they feel empowered by their faith, not restricted by it.
It highlights the need for a nuanced approach, one that acknowledges the power of belief systems while also being wary of potential manipulation.
Absolutely. We need to move beyond simply dismissing traditional beliefs as superstition or ignorance. These beliefs are deeply rooted in cultural and historical contexts that need to be understood and respected.
And it seems like that understanding needs to be shared across the board, from social workers and law enforcement to those working within the legal system.
You're absolutely right. We need to equip those on the front lines with the knowledge and tools to address this issue effectively. That includes training in cultural sensitivity, understanding the nuances of different belief systems, and recognizing the signs of spiritual abuse and manipulation.
We also need to be mindful of the ethical considerations. It's a delicate dance between offering support and respecting individual autonomy.
It is, and we can't forget the potential for unintended consequences. For instance, some argue that emphasizing the spiritual aspects of this issue might distract from the very real socioeconomic factors that drive people into these situations.
So it's about striking a balance, addressing the spiritual needs of the victims, while also acknowledging the broader context of poverty, lack of opportunity, and systemic inequality.
Exactly. It's a complex issue that requires a multifaceted approach. We can't just focus on one aspect and ignore the others.
Speaking of multiple facets, we've talked a lot about how traditional religions are being exploited. But what about the role of more mainstream religions in combating trafficking? Can faith communities be part of the solution?
Absolutely. Faith communities can play a vital role in prevention support and advocacy. They can provide a safety net for vulnerable individuals, challenge harmful ideologies, and raise awareness within their communities.
It seems like there's a lot of untapped potential there. Our religious leaders have a platform and a moral authority who could be incredibly influential in this fight.
They do imagine faith leaders speaking out against trafficking from the pulpit, educating their congregations about the signs of exploitation, and providing resources to those who might be at risk. They could also advocate for policy changes that address the root causes of trafficking.
It sounds like a powerful force for good that could really make a difference.
It could, but it requires a willingness to engage with these issues in a meaningful way, to move beyond just words and take concrete action.
It all comes back to that idea of reclaiming the true power of religion, using it to uplift and empower rather than exploit and control.
Exactly, and that power lies not just in the hands of religious leaders,
Right.
but in the hands of each and every individual who chooses to stand up for justice and compassion.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in this fight, whether it's educating ourselves, supporting organizations working on the front lines, or advocating for change within our own communities.
And sometimes it's as simple as listening to the stories of survivors, bearing witness to their experiences and amplifying their voices.
Because their stories have the power to not only educate, but also to inspire action.
Exactly. It's through understanding their struggles that we can truly begin to dismantle the systems that perpetuate this injustice.
Will said, this has been a truly eye-opening exploration of the complex intersection of religion and human trafficking.
Indeed, it's an issue that demands our continued attention, our empathy, and our unwavering commitment to seeking solutions.
It's clear that this issue runs much deeper than many people realize, and we've been talking about the exploitation of traditional African religions, but we haven't touched much on the ethical considerations of using faith, particularly Pentecostalism, in rehabilitation efforts.
That's a crucial aspect to consider. While some survivors find solace and empowerment in Christianity, it's vital to approach this integration with caution. The goal should be to empower individuals to make their own choices, not to replace one form of control with another.
It's that fine line we talked about earlier, isn't it? Respecting their beliefs while also encouraging critical thinking and autonomy.
Yeah.
How do we ensure we're not simply imposing our own values under the guise of helping?
That's where cultural sensitivity and ongoing dialogue become absolutely critical. We need to create space for survivors to explore their own beliefs and values, even if those beliefs differ from our own. It's about providing support, not conversion.
So it's less about offering a solution and more about empowering them to find their own path to healing.
Precisely. And that path may involve incorporating elements of their traditional faith, embracing a new faith, or even rejecting organized religion altogether. The key is that it's their choice.
It makes me wonder if there are any successful models for incorporating spirituality into rehabilitation efforts in a way that respects individual autonomy.
There are some promising initiatives emerging that prioritize informed consent, individual choice, and ongoing dialogue. For example, some organizations are partnering with religious leaders from various faiths, including those familiar with traditional African religions, to provide culturally sensitive counseling and support.
That sounds like a much more inclusive approach, recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. And it also acknowledges the expertise and insights that can be found within diverse faith communities. Remember, many religious leaders are deeply concerned about human trafficking and are actively working to combat it.
It seems like there's a lot of potential for collaboration and interfaith dialogue around this issue.
There is, and it's something that we need to be actively encouraging by working together. We can create a more holistic and effective response to this complex problem, but it's not just about institutional collaboration, it's also about individual action.
What can our listeners do to make a difference?
Education is a powerful first step. Learning about the realities of human trafficking, the specific ways in which religion is used as a tool of coercion, and the challenges faced by survivors is crucial.
Knowledge is power, as they say.
It is, and once you have that knowledge, you can start to have conversations within your own circles, raise awareness, and challenge misconceptions.
So it's about amplifying the voices of survivors and pushing for change.
Exactly. Support organizations working on the front lines advocate for stronger policies and hold those in power accountable. Even small actions can have a ripple effect.
Well, this has been a truly eye-opening deep dive into a dark and often misunderstood aspect of human trafficking. It's left me with a lot to think about.
It is a reminder that the fight for justice requires not only legal action, but also a deep understanding of the cultural and spiritual forces at play.
And a willingness to challenge our own assumptions and biases.
Absolutely. It's a journey of learning and unlearning, of listening and amplifying voices that are often silenced.
Thank you for guiding us through this complex topic. It's been really insightful.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the intersection of religion and human trafficking in Nigerian trafficking networks. We hope this conversation has been informative and thought-provoking, and we encourage you to continue exploring this important issue until next time. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep striving for a more just and compassionate world.